following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Today we keep the conversation going on cities as socially responsible investors, and we hear an update from the Palestine Solidarity Encampment at VIU. This week, Nanaimo City Council narrowly passed a motion asking staff to prepare a report with options to update the city's investment policy to include a percentage of its portfolio in socially responsible and low greenhouse gas emissions investments. The city of Nanaimo has around $200 million in various reserve funds. On Wednesday's show, we were breaking down the issue with Peter Urbanc, CEO of the Municipal Finance Authority of BC, or MFA for short. When local governments in BC borrow money, they do it through the MFA. The MFA also offers investment opportunities to municipal governments. It operates under the governance of a board of members appointed from various regional districts within the province. I'm going to get you back to the second part of my conversation with Peter Urbanc, breaking down Council's debate and the wider issue of local governments looking to tackle socially responsible investing.
The last thing I just want to mention, right? A local government, the objectives of its investments are first, safety. They want to preserve the capital they invest in. Second, they want liquidity. They want to make sure that they can sell investments when they need the cash, or some investments, if they have unforeseen difficulties around the budget, they may want to have some investments like a deposit in a bank that they can sell at any time without a loss. And then finally, their third objective is to maximize risk-adjusted returns. Only once safety and liquidity has been met as an objective. So you have to ask yourself, if you're going to add another objective to those three objectives, what would it be? One would be, for example, like the city of Vancouver has done, objective number 4, do not invest in fossil fuel related entities. And so you can do that. The city of Vancouver, I think, is the only city in BC that has decided to add that to their policy. But it does add a lot of work then to the staff to figure out what that means. And it also reduces the amount of investments that the city can make. So it does theoretically reduce your returns over time because you're investing in less things. So the theory says that the more things you can invest in theory, the better your risk-adjusted return. I don't want to really get into that, but that's just the way the math works. The more things you have and they move in different directions, if you put them into a portfolio, the more things you have, the better off you are typically. So you got to think about all these things before you start really trying to take a good lens, your social, council has to apply that lens to the activities of the city, but you have to ask yourself, applying it very firmly in an investment portfolio, is it going to have the impact I want? And does it add too much complexity? And does it start hurting the original intent of those funds, which are to be safe, liquid, and you need to maximize your returns over time?
Earlier on in our conversation, I believe you gave a figure of, in BC, municipal reserves equate to about $20 billion. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Does money at that scale, the idea of, I guess, of course, we can think of the idea of investing being that you are using your money to make more money over time so that it doesn't just sort of disappear with inflation. But there's also the angle to it that, your money doesn't just magically grow. It's being used to do something. And so the consideration, I guess, behind socially responsible investing is that you would want to make sure your money isn't being used to do something that you deem to be causing more harm than is justified by your financial gains. At the level of $20 billion, what kind of impact could that have on the world?
Well, it certainly could have an impact in its totality, although the capital markets, are trillions of dollars in size. So I would submit that even $20 billion is really a drop in the bucket. But really, the way to look at it, though, is that those $20 billion are owned by 182 local governments and regional districts across BC. You'd have to have all 182 to agree on what it is that they want to target in terms of environmental or social outcomes, right? Each local government is independent and has to make their own independent decisions. So you'd have to rally together all the local governments and agree in order to invest that $20 billion towards one, two, or more causes.
And an issue that seems to have emerged both from the dialogue at the council meeting and in our conversation today is perhaps just the difficulty in the financial system of maybe getting transparency from, say, big banks on where the money goes. Is there any kind of level of government in our society that has the tools to do something about that?
Absolutely. And we are going in that direction. So I can't speak to credit unions, but I do think that credit unions will be subject to very similar regulation. But at the countrywide level, OSFI, who is the regulator for the big six banks and all the other banks that operate nationally throughout Canada. So OSFI has rules that, by the way, will apply to MFA as well, because we are going to voluntarily, as an IFRS accounting filer, we follow certain accounting regulations, and we will also follow big bank regulatory pronouncements voluntarily. So these rules are going to force all financial institutions to disclose not just the emissions of their own operations, but also the financed emissions. So all of the lending that they do will have to have, and this is coming up, in the next couple of years, we will have this data. They will have to every year talk about their scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions in their financial statements and disclose them. And then we will know whether RBC, TD, or CIBC in its lending operations has a bigger carbon footprint than one of the other banks. And so these regulations, and so there is optimism in the future that a lot of what I'm talking about now, a lot of what I'm discussing here is really sort of, it's a wild, wild west out there in terms of the data. So if we don't have data to look at that's standardized, we can't even really do social finance or socially responsible investing, right? We can only do that if the data is good. The data is going to get much better, particularly around climate, and then possibly over time on social and governance and other environmental things. But around climate, the data is definitely going to become better. And yes, you have regulators across every country in the Western world that are forcing disclosures, and we are going to have standardization, but that'll still take a few years.
Is there anything else you feel like it's important to bring to this conversation that people in Nanaimo keep in mind about this issue?
Well, I don't want to, it doesn't make sense, on the one hand to say that a local government shouldn't be looking at its operations holistically and aligning them to broad vision and objectives that council has set, right? We can all agree on that. I think without a doubt, for example, if you look at infrastructure that's being built by any city, regional district, local government, more and more a climate or environmental lens is put at the onset of building some infrastructure. MFA lends to Nanaimo so they can build infrastructure. And so the public works team should absolutely, be engaged and they should be aligned with the broader mission and vision of the local government. And the same can be said about the finance department. However, I would be remiss if I didn't say that right now, I think it's very dangerous to try to take too big of a deep step into going fully fledged socially responsible investing, because the data is still not great. we don't have a lot of things to compare things to. And we also want to make sure that this idea that your investments are safe, liquid, and get a decent return are not put to the side with a social compass there. Because I'll go back to my original comment, right? If you lose your reserves because you try to do something good with it, you probably haven't done what you're supposed to do with those, right? They're there for a specific purpose. And so we have to think about that purpose. Now, to say on the side, well, okay, we believe, for example, the way the city of Vancouver did, that we believe we're in a climate emergency. We're going to do everything we can to reduce climate footprints of us and all the various trades we use as we operate our business and we run a city. Sure, we should try to do that. And so maybe in that context, you say, well, I want to do fossil fuel free investing because that's simple. There's existing products. You can come up with a definition. But if you try to incorporate a lot of some of the things that some of these other counselors were talking about, second and third order impacts, one counselor was talking about how, and I agree with this comment, how private capital has through things like REITs and big investors in real estate have contributed to our housing crisis because for many reasons, but they've basically gone and focused on high-end apartments. They haven't focused on more affordable apartments, et cetera, et cetera. And you have capital that's going out there and has commoditized real estate and bought big swaths of real estate to develop it and sell it at a profit. That could have a negative consequence, and it does. But if you try to do it through your reserves portfolio, you're trying to impact a second or third order impact, and it would be far too complicated to make that association. And that's just one example. That's just housing, right? And we have 50 things that local governments want to deal with. So it becomes too complicated. So you have to think about, does the staff that's managing the area, are we complicating their lives too much? And are they taking their eye off of their basic objectives? Or can we sprinkle in some of this on the side where it makes sense? Perhaps it makes sense. But again, just be careful about trying to introduce too much complexities into people's lives. We're trying to co-opt every profession because climate is such an emergency situation. We're trying to incorporate it everywhere all at once, and sometimes that can lead to certain problems. So I just would be careful about how we go about some of these things when we're looking at investment portfolios.
Peter Urbanc, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you.
Peter Urbanc is CEO of the Municipal Finance Authority of BC. That was part 2 of a conversation we got started on Wednesday's show. You can find that one on Midcoast Morning's podcast feed and at chly.ca/Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Support Midcoast Morning and CHLY's nonprofit newsroom today by becoming a sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. Local news can't survive without your support. Another way to help us out is to share this show with your friends and tell them why they should support us. Finally, if you're listening to the podcast edition of Midcoast Morning, go and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast feed you use. It helps people find us.
Vancouver Island University has served a trespass notice to the Palestine Solidarity Encampment on its grounds. In a statement posted to its website Thursday afternoon, the university said it issued the notice Thursday requesting that protesters vacate and dismantle their encampment by 8 a.m. on Monday, July 15th. VIU said in the statement that it will be commencing a court action seeking damages from encampment participants and injunctive relief if the encampment is not vacated by 8 a.m. on July 15th. The statement said that VIU noted that the Ontario Superior Court has granted an injunction against the protest encampment at the University of Toronto. It also said that VIU has retained external counsel to file this court action. The encampment has been up at VIU since May 1st. VIU said encampment participants have escalated the severity of disruptive activities since the encampment's inception. The most recent example listed in the statement is from Wednesday, when VIU says that encampment participants vandalized university property, including affixing posters to walls with permanent adhesive and vandalizing the Starbucks sign with red paint. The move comes as a number of pro-Palestinian encampments at Canadian universities have come down in recent days. At McGill University in Montreal, private security was used to remove protesters from an encampment that was dismantled Wednesday. That same day, it was announced that a deal was reached by the University of Windsor and representatives from the encampment on its campus. The agreement would see students removing tents within 48 hours, with the university agreeing to provisions around investment and enhanced anti-racism initiatives. Earlier this week, an encampment at UBC ended voluntarily, with protesters leaving the site over the weekend. CHLY reporter Lauren McKenzie visited VIU's campus on Wednesday before the most recent trespass notice was given and spoke with a representative from the Palestine Solidarity Encampment.
As sort of VIU stated in their last update that, again, that you were, quote, jeopardizing the safety of VIU staff and students. Are you concerned at all, are you or the encampment concerned at all that VIU might take steps to look at an injunction to get you off campus? Are you worried at all about RCMP getting involved or an injunction happening?
Of course, we are worried about RCMP being involved. We have not seen a good pattern of police involvement in student protests across both Canada and the world, but also primarily America. We have seen violence being against the students, and it does not help that most of the students at the encampment happen to be of vulnerable positions. You know, you have students of color, you have Indigenous students, you have students that are part of the LGBTQ community, and those are all sectors and people who have faced police violence before, either themselves or they have seen their community face it. So I think rather like VIU is preferring to speak to the police rather than to just come and talk to their students is very concerning. About an injunction, again, that's something that will cost the university money. It's going to waste time. It's unnecessary. All they have to do is come to the table and reach an agreement. Today we have seen the University of Windsor reach an agreement with their students. Easily done. They came to the table. They've had multiple meetings, multiple proposals going back and forth that both parties, the students and the admin, have worked on, and then it got signed. And this is all we're asking VIU to take. So for them to take steps like an injunction involving the police and not speaking to their students, that is very concerning, and it really makes us question what their priorities are and what their intentions are when they are dealing with their students. So,
because we have seen several universities such as UBC and the University of Waterloo and University of Ottawa that's all sort of decamped because although they haven't had an injunction, they're worried about police violence occurring or an injunction occurring. Mm-hmm. Is this a conversation you're having within the encampment that the VIU encampment has to sort of figure out what maybe comes next now?
Absolutely. This is a conversation we've been having within the encampment since May 1st. We're always worried about the safety and status of everybody, but especially the people that are involved with the encampment. Like I said, our goal is to decamp as soon as possible. The only reason we've had to have an encampment in the first place is because our demands and our concerns have not been responded to since October of 2023. So it is disheartening to see and sad to see other universities have to make that decision because their admins are, like VIU is doing, ignoring them. They're choosing to involve the RCMP and other police within that jurisdiction. For example, UBC have had constant police surveillance since they started the encampment. And this alone takes a toll on students. It's not only the actual interaction between students and the police that can bring back, and put them in vulnerable positions. It's the constant surveillance. It's the villainizing that is done by their admin that makes other students perhaps turn against them or employees and such. And statements, for example, like the safety was jeopardized, or it was an unsafe situation, or created a risk for employees. These are outright lies. When we had gone into that building in 255, for example, some staff stayed, and we offered them earplugs. Same at the campus stores; they were friendly. There was nothing that was happening that was risking anyone's safety. So again, it's like these small things that university admins choose to take that is forcing these students that are there with concerns about genocide to think that maybe this is not the best way, because they are being put at risk and they are being put at harm's way. University of Waterloo are suing their students for $1.5 million. That is completely ridiculous. There is no need to do that. We have students that are here with a concern. They've had the same concern since October. The universities ignoring them have forced them to have an encampment. And the universities are just choosing to take steps that are unnecessary, that will probably cost them money and put very bad attention and light on them. And it's actually confusing as to why, unless the universities are so invested in being complicit in genocide that they would rather take these routes than to listen to what their students are saying.
Do you communicate with any of the other encampments even before they maybe have shut down or not?
Absolutely. We have been in contact with encampments since before May 1st. We did go up at the same time as the University of Victoria, and we are right now in contact with all encampments across the world, ones in Spain, Germany, Belgium, and other encampments, especially in the UK. So we do keep that circle going, and it's very important to have these connections in terms of next steps, types of agreements, types of how to deal with universities. Some universities are dealing differently with their students than others, and it does help that we have precedent, we have examples, and we have an idea of what could happen, so we are prepared when VIU makes their next choice. For example, like I said, University of Windsor had reached an agreement. We were aware of the steps that was being taken, and we're also giving seeing feedback as well about that as it was happening. And it was really helpful to see that and to discuss what is an agreement and what is an agreement that could maybe put other encampments at risk if it's an agreement that is not perhaps up to the demands. So yes, we have been in contact with encampments all around the world.
When was the last time you were in contact or had a sit-down conversation with somebody from the VIU senior administration? Yeah, so June 11th was the last time. During the June 11th, there was a 30-minute meeting, and we had chosen to take the high road and go back to the table, even though the day before VIU had walked away from the table because they had brought in a new item to the agenda that was not part of it, and when we had refused to discuss it first. We said we'd discuss it at the end. When we had refused to discuss it very first, they had walked away from the table. We decided, because our goal is to stop, it's a justice-driven goal, it's about genocide, we decided that we'd go back to the table and speak with them for 30 minutes. And during that conversation, we were promised to be contacted by maximum June 16th, after convocation ended, because they were all busy with convocation, with at least new dates and such. And actually, jokingly, we had brought up in the meeting that what's going to make us sure that you guys are not going to ignore us after the convocation and not respond to us for weeks. And they had said, oh, no, we are not going to do that. And then they end up doing that. They had reached out after that via email with a proposal of the things that we had already discussed in meetings, but it does not include any of the other things on the agenda items or any other invitations for dialogue. And right now they had just said that their dialogue is on pause until they see what their next steps are in regards of other types of protests. What are the next 2 months going to look like before the school restarts up for the encampment? Right. So, like I said, our main goal is to decamp as soon as possible. We just need VIU to come to the table with good faith and stop doing their little PR war that they're playing, and stop, trying to attempt to villainize the students. They're really, it's like a drama show at this point. It's like, oh, they said this, and then we're going to respond by saying, oh, we said this, and they said this, and it's just going back and forth. It's silly. It makes no sense. We need VIU to become serious about genocide, to stop being petty, and to come back to the table so we can finish this as soon as possible. Classes on campus are not really our concern, whether they're running or not. Our conversation is with admin.
And sure, yes, more students being on site for the encampment gives it more exposure and stuff. But again, that's not our goal. Our goal is to reach an agreement with VIU. We are prepared, however, to escalate further or to stay until our demands are met and VIU comes to their senses and stops being petty and has these conversations with students. I mean, it's really confusing why they're coming to talk to the table when their students have been facing racism since especially October. It's really confusing, but again, we are steadfast in our commitment. We are standing with Palestine. We're here to talk about genocide and racism on campus and as a complicity in genocide. So we are prepared to take any steps necessary to make sure that the demands are met while remaining peaceful and maintaining a safe environment.
A representative from the Palestine Solidarity Encampment at VIU speaking with CHLY reporter Lauren McKenzie on Wednesday. Since that interview was recorded, VIU has served a trespass notice to the encampment, ordering that protesters vacate and dismantle the site by 8 a.m. on Monday or face a court action seeking damages from encampment participants. CHLY reached out to VIU but were told by a spokesperson for the university that no one was available for an interview. You can stay tuned for updates on this story on our website, chly.ca/news. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. If you're already a supporter, record a voice memo telling others where you're listening from and why they too should support our work. After you're done, you can email it to us. Also, share the podcast with your friends. While Meta is blocking Canadian users from sharing news content on their Facebook feeds, you can still share our podcast directly with your friends via Facebook or Instagram Messenger. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Snuneymuxw First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.